Hi, everybody, and welcome to the True Nordic Feminine. It's an online series of mothers with a connection to the Nordic countries. And I've already explained a little bit about why I am doing this wonderful series. And today I have Catherine Bjørksten. I'm going to do it in the Nordic way because that's the only way I know how to say it.
Oh, we can.
Yeah. Welcome. I'm super excited for today. I think it's going to just be super rich. You have so much embodied knowledge. You have also written a book I would love for you to talk about a little bit later that you just published recently. You Are Loved, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You
just
are
love
loved,
the title.
essential spirit guides and guardians.
Yes. And I always love to kind of give it over to you to present yourself, to tell us a little bit about who you are in the world, to share with us, yeah, a little bit maybe about your journey, where you started off, etc. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So I started off in Finland 43 years ago. And so I was born in Finland, but my parents moved very quickly to France. And that's where I grew up. I grew up in Paris up until the age of about 23 when I moved back to Finland, actually. I lived there for about 4 years. And then I basically moved to London, where I'm based now for the past 17 years.
Wow.
And it's been an interesting journey because you and I were talking about the fact that, like, what is our connection to our roots? And that whole journey has been an inherent part of the bigger journey I've been on.
Yeah.
And trying to find, like that sense of belonging somewhere, because I'm not born in a place where, I'm surrounded by extended family and really connected to the land. I've moved around a lot, and, Paris in the 80s was not super cosmopolitan. So it was quite intense. And I went to French Catholic school. I'm not Catholic. It was an interesting flavor, which I think, tainted my experience a lot. And as a result, took me on a journey. And before my spiritual journey, which I think is mostly the case for the vast majority of people, is we have to find ourselves in a place of pretty big suffering for us to transition into the spiritual world. Yeah. So my journey has included, I had an eating disorder, which, was not really kind of, known, or people didn't know how to deal with that, when was it, like 20 years ago, at least. Yeah. So that was, quite intense to be dealing with that at that time. And also in a culture that, wasn't very supportive, I felt. I became really good at refining the skills that, a lot of healers, whatever shape or form their healing takes. But I became like a really great chameleon in terms of reading people, in terms of getting into different types of energies and stuff like that. So I always find it fascinating how our healing gift is kind of triggered. I'll get more into that a bit later, but it was kind of like a world of suffering that led me onto my path. And when I moved to Finland, I studied there and worked in advertising. That's my original background, is marketing and advertising, and which was, fun, but wild and crazy. And I continued with the marketing and the advertising when I moved to London. And so after having both my kids, I'm fast forwarding many years now. I have 2 sons. And I think really becoming a mother was my greatest initiation. I really didn't know what hit me, and I anticipated. And I think it's the case for a lot of people, because we also live in cultures that are very kind of isolated and very individualistic. So we don't bring children into the world with a village that is holding us. And I think as a mother, it's really, really tough. So my biggest kind of break, so to speak, especially that's, I think, when my spiritual journey really started, was the birth of my first son, who's now 12. And after that, it's kind of, evolved over time.
Mm. Wonderful. I mean, there's so much we can talk about, but
I know.
definitely, I mean, like I told you a little bit prior to starting off this talk, is that one of the reasons why, and I've said this now in several interviews for those of you watching, I've really searched for an embodied mother that also chooses different pathways, you know, more as like a, yeah, like a sister or a role model, or just like somebody to, yeah, to help guide a little bit the journey ahead. And that's because I couldn't find that many. That's why I felt really, really called. Like it came over me like a really strong force. Like, and I've been waiting for this moment, and now it just came. It's just here, and here you are. I just find it, you know, wonderful, because it's motherhood. There's so many things we can talk about, and there are so many places you can find information. But what I really love talking about is the stuff that you don't find out there.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that it's for sure an initiation. And before we kind of go dig deeper, I would love for you to kind of talk a little bit about your, you know, what you do in the world and what initiations mean, because I like to break things down so that people are with us here. Like, what is an initiation, and why does that have meaning to you, and what's kind of your path? What path do you follow in your life, right?
Yeah. So I think an initiation is usually a massive change. It's like, you know, these moments that we have in our lives that are just like shocks, basically.
Yeah.
And the difference between a shock and an initiation for me is how consciously we approach the shocking factor in our life and how much we choose to listen to it as a teacher, because an initiation is a teaching to go into a deeper level of consciousness. That's how I see it.
Yeah.
And an initiation is a place that is really difficult, where somehow we break. So if you take more traditional indigenous cultures, they have very planned initiations, which they call like rites of passage, which we've lost, unfortunately, in our modern Western world, because I think it's very helpful. They kind of prepare, you know, the youngsters to certain aspects of life where, you know, it's not going to be that easy. They have to like have a deeper vision and not sort of just be told by society, you need to look like this, you need to do that. It's a vision that they need to find within themselves, and a guidance in that really difficult initiation that they need to find within themselves or through spirit. So for me, initiation is also very much linked to working with spirit. And that is kind of like it's the different levels of consciousness that we're going to encounter. That's how I see initiations. And the work that I do in the world is, it's really interesting that you're bringing this up, because I've been told quite a lot, whether it's through readings or people who've met me, that I'm almost like a walking initiation. Like that's the energy that I hold. And
Wow.
and I know that it's probably not always easy. You can ask, you know, people who have been in my life, you know, not necessarily coming in through wanting to work with me consciously,
Yeah.
but, you know, even my parents or my ex-husband or my children, because I have chosen to follow this path. So like I have a devotion to my path, which has been really, really tricky as a mother, because the devotion to the path needs to include being a mother. And in the beginning of my spiritual awakening, if you want to call it that, I found it really difficult to be present. And I just wanted to, like, you know, kind of be with the spirit and in ceremony and sacred sites and all of this. And the fact of the matter was that I have two children who needed me and who still need me. So that has been a massive part of my journey as well, to reconcile the daily life and you know, spirit or spiritual and sacred work, ceremonial work, and how do you marry the two? Because ultimately we have kind of almost this distorted idea that it's one or the other. And of course, it's nice to sit in ceremony and for me, it is be in communion with spirit, you know, and go through like really intense, like fire ceremonies or plant medicine, or, you know, it's not always pleasant, but like that works for me. And what I've realized is that you know, we can't separate the two. The whole point of us being here and having these spiritual experiences, and however we deliver them to share with others, the whole point is how we live our daily lives.
Yeah.
It's not like, how do we separate ourselves, have daily life here, and then our spiritual life here.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people, and I think like the vast majority still kind of, especially people who are in the beginning of their path or who are not on their spiritual path yet, they're like, well, I don't want to leave my life.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like go just and live this spiritual life. There will be changes, that's for sure, in your daily life, but it doesn't mean that you can't exist here on earth, because the whole point is to exist here on earth in a body.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what I like teach or share. So I work one-to-one with people, more in a mentorship type of relationship, and I hold retreats. And then I wrote this book that you mentioned, which is called, I'll show it.
Yeah.
You Are Loved, Essential Spirit Guides and Guardians. And it was interesting because I was commissioned to write it. It's a series of 6 books that Random House, which is a pretty well-known publishing house, wanted to put out in the world. They really know that there is an interest in spirituality that is emerging, and I got to write the one about spirits. And one thing that I've learned for anyone who is feeling called to write a book is that whatever you're going to write in your book, you're going to be challenged to really embody it, like life and spirit, especially if you write about spirit, like you're going to be challenged to the bone. And that was my relationship to this book. And that has really, really deepened my relationship to spirit. And it's taken me now on a more authentic and truthful path of spirituality for me, because I've always felt really drawn to shamanism. And for some reason, I've kind of shied away from it. And I've felt like, you know, oh, who am I to call myself, you know, like a shaman or a shamanic practitioner? And there's a lot of stuff out right now in the spiritual scene that, you know, said, you know, like about cultural appropriation, which I totally agree with. I think, you know, like the modern Western world has just like gone to the buffet table and served itself and stuffed itself and been like, this is mine, I want more, because that's our MO here in the modern Western world. But there's also somehow, unfortunately, something that has been a byproduct of that is like, all the healers and all the people who have, like, you know, we all have indigenous roots here in Europe, because this is where we're from. Indigenous, like an indigenous person is somebody who is originally from. And I think there's a lot of confusion in terms of spiritual practices in like our modern European or even North American world, where, you know, a lot of people say, well, you can't be a medicine person, you can't be a shaman, you can't be this, that, and the other, because this is what, you know, like only the indigenous, like the real indigenous people are allowed to call themselves. And I agree to a certain extent, because there are a lot of people who are misusing that, and it's really not beneficial to anyone. And there are a lot of people who have these gifts within themselves of healing and sharing, you know, and communing with the land and the spirit of the land. And they don't know how to, because we don't have a blueprint that is, you know, set by an indigenous tribe that holds a lineage and it's super clear. So we are in the modern Western world really trying to find our way around that. And as women, it sits really naturally within us. I did this training in womb awakening, divine feminine kind of roots. And one thing that really stuck with me was women are by default natural born shamans, you know, sensitive, connected to the earth, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's a really, really important conversation, because that's also where we find our strength. And as mothers in the societies that we live in, we are so spread thin. And like you and I were talking, like, especially in the Nordic type of way of operating, we're so self-sufficient, we're so isolated, so individualized. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. And that's when a lot of mothers, including myself, have had breakdowns at different levels, different expressions. But if we work consistently with the land and have community around us and work with the support of spirit, we will have a completely different experience.
Wow, this is why I love having podcast, or I've been wanting to have a podcast with you, because it's just like flowing like a, I don't even want to say river, I want to say like waterfall, but I love it. But there are some things that I also would like to just kind of weave together, because
Yeah,
it's just so rich. That's why. Because there's been like several things. This is what I do. I kind of just like, there's like a red thread. So
yeah,
there's several things, and I can kind of start at the ending. So the reason why I wanted to call it the True Nordic Feminine is
yeah,
because this has also been my journey. I've traveled the world to find myself home, because I believe that, as you say, this is, if we want to be honest, you know, regardless of where you are at on your journey, if you really feel into yourself, there's like a hunger, there's like a yearning, and
yeah,
especially in women, because we feel so much, and we just know, we have an inner knowing. And I'm not going to go deep into that because it's a whole other topic, but I feel like what you're talking about with spiritual or cultural appropriation is, you know, also a byproduct of, what can I say, the world globalizing really, really fast and
yeah,
making it really, really easy to travel everywhere, but also a byproduct of what we've been living in, separation. You know,
yeah,
we've been living in a, you know, you can take that, I will have this, you cannot do this, you know, and then it's all like, I don't want to go into it even, because it's all quite messy. I think
yeah,
that what I want to do and what I have been doing, because I've been working with like world music festivals, and I've been with indigenous musicians, or even just like musicians from all over the world. And what I always do, you know, being also of two cultures, is that I just go into my heart. I just connect to my heart. I've hung out with like gay Lebanese rock stars, and, you know, like, I don't know, like throat singers from Mongolia, or, you know, whoever they are, what we connect around is our hearts. So I
yeah,
just look them deeply into their eyes, and I stay connected to myself. And we've had beautiful exchanges. And then we see that actually we're not so different. But what is different is, obviously, like you say, a lot of these people have stayed much closer to their own traditions,
mm,
to their indigenous traditions. And this
yeah,
is the reason why I wanted to do this, because here in the North, I feel that there's an enormous power,
mm,
yet nobody has initiated us into it. It's
yeah,
almost like it's slowly awakening, and I'm seeing several people, some couldn't join this particular podcast, but I feel like it's going to probably be the next round, because they're already going out in the forest, creating things, communicating with the forest, creating tinctures, etc. And I
mm,
believe that there's so much richness here. So what would you say you feel in the Nordic countries, for example, the Nordic listeners, or people just feeling like, you know, I want to explore this relationship to spirit and the, you know, the deeper nature, but right now nobody can go to the Amazon, so that's done.
yeah,
How can I open, maybe in my own vicinity, in, you know, whether
yeah.
it be the Nordic forest or it be like your backyard, like how do you cultivate this? Probably read your book.
Of course.
I don't know.
Step one.
But then also, just like, how do I cultivate this relationship with spirit, and how can I, because I feel that this is like the key in motherhood, or just having a conscious relationship with spirit and yourself, is
Mm,
just connectedness,
yeah,
feeling yourself,
yeah,
you know, and especially as a mother, because it can get crazy,
yeah,
as you know.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So where would
I
you
think,
start if you're, say, a mother? Because that's where it's also time-wise, it's difficult, right?
yeah, yeah. I guess it also depends on, like the age of the children, and, there's so many different stages. But I would say, for me at least, the most obvious place to start is nature. And that's something that we have so much in the North. It's like, in Finland, where I'm from, it's, it's the capital, Helsinki, is on the water. And if you drive for like 10 minutes, you're somewhere out in a forest, you know, like it's so accessible. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people who live in those regions take it for granted,
Yeah.
which is obvious because they always have it around them. But there is, I think there's a conscious relationship to establish with the natural world. So what I speak about in my book, for instance, is working with nature spirits. And by that, I'm not talking about looking for gnomes and fairies and skipping around the forest, you know, on full moon, which is great if that's what you feel drawn to do. But, you know, the most important thing is to start establishing an animistic relationship to life. And what I mean by animistic is we basically acknowledge that everything that is alive has a spirit. So flowers, so different kingdoms, the plant kingdom with flowers and trees and, you know, everything that comes in the plant kingdom. Then we have the rock kingdom, which is, you know, mountains, stones, crystals, etc., etc. And then we have the animal kingdom, which is very close to the human because there is kind of like almost like a closer translation point because they have movement, because, you know, they have their own language, etc. So it's quite easy for us to kind of relate to animals. And then we have Mother Earth as a being, to connecting to the earth, which I think women, you know, naturally do. And that's something that I really invite women especially to sort of start exploring, is what is their relationship to the earth? Like literally, like what do you need, and what is the earth kind of bringing forward in you? Is it like, you know, running around in the mud and rolling around, going completely wild, which I think is actually a really, really key component in the whole topic that we're talking about. Is there is a sternness, if that's a word, like people are quite stern in the Nordic countries, and a seriousness, which is an amazing advantage when you need to like go and get stuff done. And it has an incredible source of strength behind it. And I think also something to like spark the spirit, especially in the Nordic culture, is play and wilderness. And so how much do you allow yourself to go wild and really go into it? Like, you know, I just spent 4 days in the woods on my first, I'm on a shamanic training for the next 3 years. And we did a fire ceremony. And when I came back home, I didn't realize I was covered in mud. Really? We had a whole other bunch of stuff going on. And I was like, you know, we need that aliveness to really live. For me, the way I look at life, it's like there is life and there's anti-life. And in life, we need the connection to spirit, because otherwise we rely too much on all the people in our lives, all the cultural paradigms that are telling you we're going in the right direction, we're doing the right thing, etc., etc. And we become desensitized to like life, you know, and our own life force. And so working with the spirits of nature, I think, is a really good entry point to start communing with spirits, because you can see, you know, like the elements are actually a great entry point. So working with fire, air, earth, water, and see what is your connection with it. Like, is there one element that you really like? And is there an element that you really dislike? And that usually informs us quite a lot in terms of where we're at, you know. So for instance, if you really dislike water, I would invite you to look at what's your relationship to your emotions, because water and emotions go hand in hand. It's the vehicle of emotions, the element of emotions. Air is the mind. If you find yourself in storms a lot, I would start looking at, you know, like, is your mind really busy? Does it race a lot? Do you live in your head? Which we all do most of the time in the modern Western society that we live in. We're disconnected from our bodies. We're disconnected from our hearts. We're disconnected from spirit. And it's so important to start plugging into all these different aspects, because that is what makes us whole. We live at a really, really tiny percentage of our capacity as human beings right now. So working with nature spirits, finding the ones that you find easy to connect with, the ones that you're resisting. Do you resist fire? You know, what's your relationship to your inner fire, your passion, your sexuality, your sensuality? And that's also a whole other topic, I think, for women, that is, and especially in the North. And having not grown up there, because I grew up in Paris, as I said.
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, how connected to sensuality and sexuality women are in the North, but I feel still that it's quite a taboo. And it's not as embodied as you would have it like in Southern Europe, for instance, or, you know, South America, where it's more, you know, a natural way of being, especially sensuality, I think.
Yeah.
So those are really like the key starting points I would invite people to start looking into when they want to start connecting with spirit. And then we start looking at, you know, our connection to our ancestors. That is really, really important, because ultimately, whatever hasn't been resolved by our ancestry is something that is going to still work itself through us. And we're going to, most healers are going to be the ones who are going to, you know, stop cycles and invest their energy and their life force in breaking the cycles, which is pretty heavy lifting. But establishing that relationship with the ancestors can be super helpful. And it's not easy. I've resisted that quite a lot, because it's felt, I don't know, a bit weird to me. And because I also have my mother is 75% Russian, and I have no connection to, so my father is 100% Finnish, Swedish speaking Finn, and on top of everything, I'm not even like 100% Finnish, I'm like a minority in the Finns. And my mom is 75% Russian, and I don't know much about, you know, that ancestry, which I'm sure is influencing me a lot. So it's also important to know that, you know, our journey is also our ancestral journey. So it would be really interesting to start looking into what's your ancestry, where do you come from, which lands, what are the stories that, you know, that have been kind of like funneling down into you, you know, like I have a lot of trauma on my dad's side, a lot of grief, like really like intense things that happened. And you know, like it's something that I can feel in my being. So working with the ancestors is also a really important part, because they can also assist us. It's not only like dealing with their trauma, but they can really assist us. When you think about how many people did it take to make you to be here present today, you know, and all their experiences, their souls, their stories, you know, their cultural heritage and all of that, you know, like all of that is alive in you. So these are kind of like main things. And I worked a lot with wisdom keepers in Peru in the Andean tradition. So not jungle juice, as they call it, which is actually quite pejorative, referring to plant medicine. I worked more with mountain spirits. So it's also important to really start kind of like looking at where are you drawn to, what really works for you, because there is so much out there in terms of, you know, spirituality and spiritual connection. So really finding what resonates, and that's, you know, really going to the heart, like you were saying. It helps us also to start tuning more into our heart for everything else in our life. So the heart is also a really, really important center to work with. And the womb for women, and that's a whole other
because I feel like it's just so rich talking to you, and I love it. Yet I also feel like there's something about there's something that is happening in all of these conversations, because we are all coming from, you just kind of laid it just out there, like we're all coming from a Nordic, or, you know, we all come from a Nordic country, and we represent these ancestors, like you said, whether we know them or not. Like half of my ancestors are Japanese, and then I have the Norwegian. So I'm coming from very stern, very controlling, very repressed. And my life story has been all about running free, you know, playing, like shedding, like, you know, and breaking these patterns. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And for some of us, that's where it starts. It just starts with this urge of like, I can't hold it back anymore. It's, it's debilitating. It's like it's not okay. And then we form more relationship of like the hunger of following that thread, right, of finding the tools. And then the more we awaken or we find whatever we feel called towards. And we were talking about that yesterday. It's not so much about the spiritual journey for me. It's not so much about the understanding with the head. Yesterday we talked a lot about the feminine, who has a very strong intuitive sense, and allowing us to trust that more fully. And that's what I've been loving talking about. So I think it's actually a very natural place to go, to the womb space, because I feel like our ancestors here in Norway, obviously they knew how to live on a land that was almost barren. So they had to depend on nature. It was not just a thing, like you say, gnomes and fairies, like it was for survival. So obviously you have to stay connected to the cycles, to the weather, to what grows where, and therefore you have to be very attuned to the wind, to the rain, naturally. And obviously what we've experienced in the North is this eradication of a lot of the feminine knowledge that was already here. It came with Christianity, without going further into that. But we already, like most of us, we already, in many countries, we already knew which herbs were good for childbirth, for menstrual pain, for wounds, etc. And all of these herbs are all around us. It's even like here I'm in the city. It's even here because it's so green, right? So I would love to kind of go deeper into where you feel, because obviously we can talk about the power of the womb, but also I would love to talk about like these times we're in. Because I feel like the fire is being reignited in the feminine in such a way now, where we're just feeling our fire. Whether we understand the power of the womb and the connection, and people are, I really highly recommend and invite you to dive deeper into that. There's a lot of knowledge already around that. But what would you say for the time that we're living in, for the feminine and our, this fire that we feel within? In terms of rediscovering our true feminine power. With these tools, all of these tools that we have available if we search for them.
I think the main thing that I've been feeling since this whole situation broke out that we've all been in is it really is a bridge to bringing in the feminine energy. And for me, speaking about the feminine and the divine feminine, the feminine fire and all of this is inclusive of the masculine. I don't believe in any kind of feminine movements, feminism, goddess, whatever, worshipping thing that that doesn't include the masculine. Like, I think we need to do it together. We need each other, and that's how this is gonna go somewhere. And I think what's happening is that the world stopped. It just did, and it's been extremely challenging for pretty much everyone in whatever personal way they've experienced this whole pandemic thing. And what I believe this is bringing forward is the feminine way of living. We have to slow down. We have to be more in our hearts. We have to connect with unconditional love. We don't have to. It's an invitation. And if we don't, I think it's going to be really difficult. But there is a slowing down and a deepening that I see in the world in general. And I think there is also truth that is coming forward. So I feel that there is a lot of kind of Kali, dark goddess energy that has come in. And dark, I don't mean, malevolent at all. I mean very benevolent, but there is a stream of consciousness in the divine feminine that is ruthless and that is in super strong integrity, very brave, and will not allow corruption of the soul. And then corruption in many different ways also, everything, how it's reflected in society. So there is a movement of truth, I think, that is really coming forward. And that is something that is very difficult for the vast majority of people to accept, because living in denial is almost like the default mode that most people live in the modern Western world.
Yeah.
The mother energy with a big M, and I'm not talking about mothers necessarily only like women who've given birth to children, but like the great mother, as in the cosmic mother, the earth mother.
Yeah.
That energy is the energy that is really bringing forward what is not in alignment anymore.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like bringing forward how the patriarchal system has really like messed up the human soul. Yeah. And when I say patriarchal, I'm really not gender-based, I'm systemic-based. I don't believe it's like men did this and, you know,
No.
it's, you know, an energy. There are women who participate in that type of, you know, way of doing things and living also. So the times that we live in is really calling forward a deepening of our own integrity. And I really like, one of the archetypes that I've been connecting with really deeply is Joan of Arc. And I've always had her, you know, her kind of presence with me throughout this journey, because she's a woman who devoted herself to spirit, who died for spirit, and who lived by the sword and the sword of truth. And I've often been kind of like, I know that I can have like triggered a lot of people in my life, because for me, truth is so important. It's like something that it's almost like my body, like cannot be in a soup of lies. And I know it's not always easy for the people who are in my life, because sometimes, you know, we need to just, you know, put our head down and get on with things and not necessarily want to deal with what's in front of us. But I feel that this time especially is really calling forward a strength and a power that we're talking about. And there's been so much about like reclaiming your power and the empowered feminine that has been overused. And I kind of almost feel like, ugh, when I say it.
No, I get it. Yeah.
But it's really like what is happening. There's no other way of like describing it. There is like a rebirth of the fire of the feminine. And in the teachings that I went through in the feminine, kind of the sacred feminine apprenticeship that I did, they said something that really resonated with me, that the divine feminine is made of two rivers, the red river and the white river. The white river is, you know, Mother Mary energy, the kind, the nurturing, the offering, the selfless, self-sacrificing, to a certain extent, you know, and that's the part of the feminine that is accepted in our society so far.
Yeah.
The red river, however, different story. We're inviting in, you know, Durga, Kali, like really like, you know, Freya, you know, like these really strong forces of truth. And Kali, like the way I've really come to see her, is that she's the goddess of destruction, yes, but the destruction of everything that is not truth. So it's like an accountability. It's like you have to grow up. And I think that's also what's happening, is like the mother archetype is really coming forward. We've been in a maiden society, like, look at how I look, and I'm skinny, and I'm this, and I'm that, and look at how successful I am, and look at all the external validation that I can flaunt in your face. Now we're transitioning to the mother, which is like, shit's getting real. You know, we have to show up in our authentic expression, and also like the vulnerability, like the heart, you know, is really coming forward as well. And if we start communicating and relating to each other with more authenticity and more vulnerability, we give permission to each other to do that. And we live in much more truth, because we're all living in a freaking lie right now. I mean, not totally, but like a lot of it is, you know, I mean, look at social media, you know. And I think that that's really where we are. We're really held accountable now by the mother to step into what we've come here to be and stop shying away from that. And that's where I believe spirit is so important to have a connection with, because when we really need to tap into that courage and that deeper knowing, that's when we call them in and start having them as our allies. So that's my...
No, I love it. And I also, I love it. And I love how also these podcasts are weaving in with each other in just this series. It's just because it's exactly this, because we are these two, we are many archetypes. And
Yeah.
I want to kind of, at the end here, I want to kind of get more personal, because also I feel that that's where we can really kind of, be examples of our own journeys, so that hopefully can spark something in others. Because then there's, so how do I? So who am I, and where? Because we all have these unique journeys. And I feel very much, I've also spent like 10 years in France, where I learned to embody more the softer, maybe more the white river, because I come from Norway, where the Red River is quite okay. It's quite okay to be outspoken. We have naturally a lot of power. A woman screaming in the streets is not a big deal. So it's been interesting, as I've been kind of going through my own journey. But what I really want to speak to a little bit is how difficult I felt it's been being a mother on top of that, because there's so many societal patriarchy, whatever. It's like there's so much pressure that's coming internally, externally. Then there's different ways of having had motherhood modeled to us. So it's kind of like running on an autopilot, and we're not even aware of what we're maybe acting out. And for a lot of mothers, and I really wanted to spend some time on this topic also because you've shared really openly, vulnerably, and just like, I bow to you for that, because it takes courage to do that on social media. But this is also what I want to, dedicate my life towards, because I've spent so much time in very deep suffering as a mother, not knowing where to turn to, feeling very locked in by it, and not necessarily having this. One thing is to be bold at work. One thing is to, like you say, to shine on social media. But I would love to, at least, this is my kind of, my offering, to invite in more of that raw, authentic vulnerability. It's okay to break down. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to, as a mother, it's okay to not make it, because the way things were made around motherhood in the modern society, in my mind, it's not sustainable at all. And believe me, I've done it. I've been a full-time working mother for 2 children without any financial support from the father for 18 years. And it doesn't work, you guys. Either your body has to pay, your nervous system has to pay. Thank God I had a very strong relationship to spirit. I honestly think, because I grew up in a home that had that as a basis. It was Christianity, but it felt pretty free to me. Didn't feel Catholic, or, I didn't get all of that shame and punishment. It was more just seeing, I've told this story many times. My mother went through so much, but I have this image of her every morning sitting in prayer and with her coffee cup, or just standing on around the stove, just with her hands up, communicating with spirit, regardless of what she was going through, or just crying tears as she was doing that, listening to music. And my mother was a strong Nordic woman. She would never shut up if there was anything wrong, and I learned how to do that. But I feel like now my generation, and what I want to bring in is like, how can we normalize how can we make a new way of being a mother, where we support each other, where we talk about the difficult stuff. So I don't know how you want to approach this, but you shared something beautiful, the other day around this.
Do you mean my breakdown, or what was it? Yeah. So I think, what led me to this breakdown was, several years in the making, a divorce and an abusive relationship following my divorce. It wasn't my marriage. Then I purchased a place, renovated that. Then I got commissioned to write this book. Then the lockdown happened. So I've been doing everything on my own, basically. And I've had, difficult relationships around me. And I think that really was the thing that led me to the breakdown, was the lack of support. And I'm sure that I would have had more support than I thought that I did, but I was so programmed to be self-sufficient that I was like, tunnel vision, I need to do this on my own. And, if I'm not able to, I'm weak and I'm a failure, and I need to be able to be self-employed, walk the path that I walk, which is super intense. And like the past 6 years have been initiation on steroids for me. And it's fine. I've come to accept that this is my path and it's fine. But when I wasn't, when I stepped into it, I was like, what the fuck is happening? Like there's so much stuff happening that is knocking me over. I have to get up again. And then I have to take the kids to school. And then I have to go through the awakening process. The spiritual path is a breaking down of who you thought you were. So relating to kids in the same time is not easy, because it's not like mommy's happy, mommy's just doing this, and this, that, and the other. And I've had a lot of grief actually when I see like kids at my like being picked up at school, and it's my perception. Everybody has their own stuff that they're dealing with, and that I've come to realize at my age. I'm like, nobody has a perfect life. But when I see mothers who seem, at least from the outside, supported, by a solid household and not having to worry about finances, et cetera. And it's been hard to realize that. And then, like co-parenting also is not easy. I mean, I know that parenting also, even when you're, in a relationship, is not always easy, because we might have different ways of wanting to educating the kids and et cetera. But what I feel that I've been missing is the tribe. It's the village, which we had by default before. And we were kind of like just held in a village that was there from before. But I think what we have the opportunity to do now is that we can have a village that is maybe a bit more based on similar values. Then it's always the question of proximity, like, the environment that we live in. We can't really build the village with somebody who lives, a 2-hour drive away, because the whole point is, if you're really starting to feel that you're not doing that great, you can't just say like, hey, can the kids come over for a couple of hours? So we need also very practical support. And I think, with my upbringing, and, I know that I have to my detriment, and it also has saved my life. I'm a very strong person. Like, if I need to go through a wall, I will. And I don't think I would be here if I wouldn't have that in me. And ironically, that's also what drove me to having a full-on breakdown, when I just couldn't function anymore. I had to ask my ex-husband to have the kids for 2 weeks, because I couldn't, deal with daily stuff. My nervous system was completely fried. I couldn't sleep. I was like 24/7 on, full on adrenal flooding, and I couldn't find peace, I wasn't eating. I mean, the whole thing.
And that was just like because it was a build up. Is that what you feel it was?
Yeah. So it kind of, I think, started, with, it could have started also with, I had postnatal depression twice, but then, my kids were quite young when we separated, and then the whole divorce, and the divorce is never fun. It's like having children. You think you know what it is until you're in it. And all the things that, that brought the relationship that I was in following that, which was really abusive emotionally and mentally and spiritually. I was in it for 3 years, and that really sucked the life force out of me. So it was, a combination of things. And then, I had to deal with, a bunch of builders who really, didn't care much for me because I'm a woman. And, I'm not usually much for stereotypes, this is happening because I'm a woman. But in this case, I knew it.
Well, it does happen. I think we can say that. Yeah.
And they were quite shitty. And I was like, and I think it was just feeling the lack of support really kind of broke my heart, and I never realized that until actually I'm saying this now, having this conversation with you. And you know, we kind of ironically play out our belief systems. And I think that's been one of my belief systems, is like, you know, there is no support there for me. And
Yeah.
ironically, with all of this, when I started writing the book, it really kicked in. Like, this past year has been intense. And they were like, okay, you have your connection to spirit, you know, you work with it, but it needs to get to a completely different level.
Yeah.
And I had to go actually really deep to work with spirit in the situation that I was, because that's where I would find the courage to reemerge somehow. And spirit works in a way backwards, which I think is maybe something a lot of people need to keep in mind. It's like, it's not like I want this to happen and instantaneously it happens because I'm asking from, you know, the help of spirit. You do the devotional work, you make an offering when you go out in nature, you do the prayer, whatever, and then you get the result. It's kind of like, you know, it
You
works.
recognize, I would
But then
say, yeah, you recognize that you are, this has been my, like, I've gone through a very similar thing, because I was like transactional, I don't know, so it wasn't just deep enough. And I think that the real realization was your true interconnectedness. Now, like, you are connected to absolutely everything. So don't you even dare not recognize it. I feel that was my, you know, breakdowns, and it's just spirit asking you to, like, can you just see what's in front of your face? God damn it! What else do I have
what's
to
in
do?
you also. That's the thing. It's like, it's not anywhere else. It's something that exists within you, and then it's different expressions. And that's the thing that I find, you know, has, for me, it has been a lot about, and also just being more open with people and allowing people to help me. And that, I think, if we have a certain, I can be quite controlling, and I'm like, you know, well, if somebody else is going to do this, it's not going to be done the right way, etc. And that's not helpful. And I've really realized it's like, just chill out, you know, it's fine if things are not perfect, and, you know, it's fine. But I think as a mother also, you know, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves in terms of giving our children what we didn't get. And I think every single parent in this world does that.
Yeah.
And I also believe that as a parent, we always try our best, even if it doesn't look like it. And we put, as mothers, I think, so much pressure on ourselves also in today's world, because, you know, there's so many, like, it's like the social media thing. And it's not only social media, it's like what's put out into the world, like, look, I'm the perfect mother, I have a perfect body, I work out every day, I'm self-employed, I'm making a lot of money, I'm a perfect cook, I'm a perfect wife, I'm great in bed, you know, my kids are perfect, you know, we're all such a balance, you know, like, just saying that, I mean, you get anxious, just like, you know. And that's why what you were saying, which I'm such an advocate for, is like, if we were just showing up more authentically and more vulnerably, we would have such a different world, you know, like, we would not feel like we are failures, and we wouldn't start, like, being, you know, kind of like hard on ourselves and having all these, like, negative, you know,
we would just
stop clouds around us. Sorry?
No, we would just stop faking. I feel like what we've done is that we've been all faking. We've been all playing games, and that's now we're like spirit, like you say, the great mother. She doesn't care actually. She just wants to create balance. So it's not possible anymore to fake it. So it's just a matter of time, I think. And I have to say, like, I have so many people coming to me saying, oh my God, I'm so relieved to be around you because I can be myself. And like their whole thing can drop. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, because I can't be anyone else anymore.
Yeah,
I can't.
totally agree. Yeah.
I just can't do it anymore. It's so fucked up, to be really honest. It's not it's fucked up, it's fucking us up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's making, and it's, you know, the deeper you go into this journey, especially as a mother, the more you see how, because I can see it now in other children and in school and things that's happening at school and with teachers. I see it everywhere now, you know, and I'm having like really deep, honest, authentic conversations with especially the teachers in school. And what I see happening actually is that because I've done this, I shared it in a post, but because I'm so authentic with myself, I can actually make a change in the world. So because I'm such an advocate for mental health and emotional stability, I've really talked about this in school, and they've really managed to kind of, not entirely obviously, but I made a little change. They were really kind of focusing on that instead of like whatever else they were focusing on. And that's when we are authentic with ourselves, we can truly, have an impact on the world.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be in that big way. You don't need to be a freaking CEO. You can
Yeah.
do it like with our neighbors.
Yeah.
And I think that's when we can say, like, I had the same thing as you. I need help. I would never ask for help. I was this perfect version of myself, whatever. And I was struggling deeply, and I would never ask for help. So I'm just so grateful for you sharing your story, because it's so like, yeah, I don't know if you want to go deeper or speak to the women who are in like abusive relationships or in complete breakdown because of homeschooling, and we're not the only ones. We both know that.
No,
It's
and I
all
think
building
that's,
now.
yeah, I think that's really important. That's the thing. It's like also because we've been so isolated because of the lockdowns and everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
We think that, oh, this is only happening to me. And one thing that I know for sure is it's not only happening to you. Like there is like, I think the most important thing with the whole abusive relationship thing, I got to a point where I knew that it was either, I was not going to make out. I was not going to make it out alive. I knew it. Like at some level, I either was going to get sick or commit suicide, or like it was so messed up, the control and the gaslighting, and it was, one thing though that I would say around that is we participate in that. And I'm not putting the blame on the person who's receiving the abuse, but we're the only ones who can break the cycle. They're never going to change. They're not going to leave, or they might leave, whatever. But we have to make the decision that we don't deserve this and we deserve better. And like cutting, they say that it takes about 7 breakups to really leave somebody who's extremely abusive. I had 3 or 4, I can't remember, broke up about 3 or 4 times. And the only way to actually cut it, and I know that some people have children, and it's difficult when you have children that you need to sort of, coordinate things. But there are things that can be done. What I want to say is that there is help out there, and there is a lot, because this has become, unfortunately, and unfortunately, it's come to light that there has been a lot of abuse. And this doesn't necessarily mean that it's only women who are being abused. It can also apply to men, but we're talking about mothers here. So what I did, for instance, a very practical thing is that I turned towards a 12-step group in sex and love addiction. And it kind of sounds like, oh my God, like seedy thing. People who are addicted to porn, but there's also that in that. But it's usually people who are drawn into really toxic dynamics, basically. Yeah. And so I had a framework for, about a year working the 12 steps, and it's the same 12 steps that you would have in AA. So, but it's just the 12 steps that, were applied to love, basically love relationships. So it's basically taking you out of addiction. And I had a container that held me with people who had gone through similar things. And I think it's really important to turn towards containers where you have people who've gone through the same experience. So it doesn't have to be a 12-step program. It can be, there are many different groups, and not to feel shame about it. I think that's so important, because the shame is what keeps us prisoner, and there's so many people, unfortunately, who have been in those situations, and fortunately, there are a lot of people who've come out of them. And yeah, it's really like, look into how you can get help. And I know, for instance, here in the UK, there's been a lot of kind of ways of getting help, even if you're in a situation where you can't speak freely, where you're kind of like held hostage in your own home, which is dreadful. But you can communicate, for instance, with the police in through text messages, or even a signal, like apparently, you can call an emergency number and just dial 55, which means you can't speak, but you're in an emergency situation. So it is really something that's coming to the forefront. And I think it's also putting down, in the context of Nordic women, and the resilience, because the resilience is also something that can keep us in that. Exactly. It's okay, I'm going to work it out for the kids, for myself, for the pretenses, for whatever. Like if you are in an abusive relationship, the relationship is abusive, you need to get out. It's not going to get better. That's one thing I've learned. And that's one thing I've heard across the board. It doesn't get better. And you have that instinct, and especially as a mother. And I think actually that's what took me out of it, because my kids, I was like, I can't leave a legacy to my children that is going to show them that this is how their mom was treated. And they kind of, they were my guardian angels in that respect, without them, who knows? But I know that as a mother, let that be your driving force. Let that be your North Star, that, you don't want this for your kids. You can get out of it. And that's really the first thing. And then going no contact, I think, is, as much as you can. Obviously, if you have kids, it's a different story. But you deserve better, and you have the strength that it takes to get out of it. And that's really what I think is super, super important to know. And there is a lot of help all around.
Yeah. And I want to say something, because this is something that was very, very hard for me. And we talked about it also in the podcast yesterday, is that because we're quite programmed by movies, etc. Like the predator is like a man with a knife and a mask. No, the predator can be somebody you love deeply. They can have deeply embedded, manipulative, narcissistic behaviors. So you can actually feel love for the person who is actually hurting you. And this is something I want to say, because that's been my trap for many, many years, because I felt very unworthy. So obviously I needed to work on that prior, and, I'm still there. I'm still working on my worthiness. It doesn't stop. I'm still working on that shame, because, and also I feel like it's really, really good to talk to people who you don't know, who's not friends and family, because I exhausted a lot of I needed to do a lot of back and forth. So I exhausted my Vincity, and they were kind of sick of hearing about it. And also it was the same story. And I actually just needed somebody who was like, who didn't know me, who could actually talk just like you're doing now. And I've also met, actually, funnily enough, because these people just keep showing up on my path, that spirit, right? I've met somebody working for a shelter in Canada, actually, but he talked to me all about the steps of how they spend a whole year of preparing, or shorter time, depends, but you can actually be prepared to leave and have a set up home and everything, and even in a different city, everything will be prepared for you. And also the talk we had yesterday was, with somebody who, she talked to the police and, to the crisis centers, and that's what we call them here. And so it's definitely possible, and it doesn't make you any less worthy. That's the thing. It actually is the opposite. This was like such a hard thing for me. Like, this is now recently is the first time I speak openly about it, because there's been so much shame around it for me. And I also didn't want my children or anyone else to put any labels on me, because I'm still, I'm still myself. And but it's also like my story has resulted in supporting other women in actually becoming really, really strong. But with the softness and vulnerability, where, you know what, when I can't cope anymore, you know what I do? I just speed dial. Even when I have thoughts of like, no, I don't want to disturb that person, I still do it. I just still reach out to somebody. I even like bother people at times. It's better to do that, or even to reach out to me or somebody you don't know. I don't care. Just do it, because then it becomes a reflex. And then it becomes something you do often. And then it becomes, that tribe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think also one of the lessons from these types of relationships is how to reclaim our own power. That's, I think, the ultimate lesson from them. It's like, how do we find our power? And one of the things I've also figured out around the theme of power is, like, the true power is the power of the heart. It's the power of love. I know it sounds like, such a cliche. And like an 80s song.
You know. Right.
Sorry.
If you know, if you know how powerful it is to change your life,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. We have also a perception of what power is that is so skewed and so like distorted. Power is money, power is power, like, you know, as in, you know, corporations and jobs and looks and, you know, and all of this. The real power is the power of love. I mean, ask Jesus, you know, it's like, you know, and that's the thing that, you know, we find so difficult to fathom because of the whole patriarchal thing that we've been bathing in for generations. I mean, millennia even. And I think that's what's really changing. Like, we're returning to the true meaning of power. And that's where the translation point is happening with the feminine. Like, it's becoming the feminine power, or that is more purified, you know, more authentic. And I'm sure that the men who are actually starting also to do their own work, because, you know, our genders have been so messed up, you know, by society and everything, all the cultural stories and everything. Like, the true masculine is also very heart-centered. It's a different expression than the feminine, but, you know, there is like a lot of space for integrity, strength, courage, support, you know, defending the tribe, defending the family, being of service is a very clear masculine kind of powerful trait. And when the two come together, like, you know, the awakened feminine, the awakened masculine, like, then, you know, shit's gonna start happening. It already is.
Yeah,
but I really, like, this is something that I feel in my bones, and that's why I'm so passionate about this work, you know. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, we could go on and on, but I totally agree with you. And I've also seen, you know, as a former, you know, whatever you want to call it, having been subjected to all kinds of different toxicity because of my own lack of self-worth, and
Yeah.
also patterns that I was observing from my parents.
Yeah.
I can say this, that, you know, for the ones of us who, and for anyone who just want to start wherever you feel called to start with working on yourself, it's truly empowering and beautiful when you start, you know, the journey with like an awakened masculine, and when you can see, because I can see, like, it's taken years and years and years, but I've finally started to see like what it means to co-create with an aligned and awakened masculine. And what it does to me is that, because the masculine is actually there to protect the feminine. So I've been a single mother doing it on my own, and for the first time in my life, I've experienced what it means to drop my guard so that I can really go deep into my gifts. And then it's like a whole new world is appearing, because we have so much to give to the world. There's so much magic, you know. We are, just like I ended last podcast, it was the same thing, like we have so much power, like we are creators, is what I say, you know. The womb space, we make babies, so when we're not making physical babies, we're creating, you know, new realities, right? So on that note, I don't know if you want to end it with, I'd have lost a track of time because this is just amazing.
Me too. No, the only thing I want to say, because we're talking about the feminine in, you know, in the Nordic countries, is like, you know, it's how do we reclaim, how do we allow ourselves to drop into the feminine? Because we're so masculine in our energy, and so kind of, which, you know, can be also helpful, but I think, you know, that's the main kind of thing that is happening for the Nordic women. It's like, how do we reclaim the feminine and really drop into that softer feminine, more receptive? Because the feminine is all about receptivity. And how can that take form, you know, in the culture that we were born into? That's really the thing that I would like to just kind of end this on, because I think that's one of the big topics in this cultural scene.
No, absolutely. And also, like, I think for the ones who are not Nordic, I can see that there's so much, hopefully, that, you know, in general, that other women can learn from this strength, who needs more of that masculine sovereignty. And then for the Nordic women listening, because I have a mixed audience, it's like, how can we soften and allow ourselves to learn from those Latin or different cultures, you know, where we are more, it's okay for us to just have a nap. I feel like that, for example, taking breaks, you know, not being But I'm just so grateful for this interview. I just feel very privileged to, to have your time, and I just want to say to anyone who feel called to, maybe you're on a break right now, which is quite natural, to
The
read.
book is not on a break.
Exactly. To read Catherine's book, because I haven't read it yet. I'm looking forward to it. And also you do share on social media, and I'm sure in the future you will have also different offerings, because it's very, I feel at least it's really, really wonderful to just see somebody stand out in the spiritual world out there who is an embodied feminine teacher, who just, I can feel that you don't take any bullshit. I can feel the initiator that you are, because it's kind of like it's a forest out there. It's very hard to actually understand what's real. And for anyone on the spiritual journey or just wanting to learn more about yourself, I feel it's super important to stay grounded, because it is actually possible to just float up there and just, this spirituality to me is all about how do I show up as a mother as much as I can, and as a woman, and as a weaver and a spiritual woman. It's like, it's all of it. I don't want to and that's what I feel this whole series is about. Like, I don't want to be one label. I want to choose for myself. And here's like different women walking, you walk a beautiful path. It's unique to you. And this is what, I invite all women to do. To share their gifts. It's unique. Like, everybody has something that the world needs. That's the true medicine. We don't actually need to go to the Amazon to drink. I've never felt called to do it anyway, but it's like, we are the medicine.
Absolutely.
Right?
Totally agree. Yeah.
I
think that's actually one of the most important messages, is we are the medicine. We really are.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you
for
everybody.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thanks, everyone.